at the expense of our civil liberties, many Americans would argue that indeed our civil liberties and civil rights are part of the great democratic ideals that make this country worth defending in the first place, and that we don't have to forsake them in order to achieve national security.
Is there any concern on this panel that where we are could go further if there's another terrorist attack on American soil?
I have a great concern about that. If you love civil liberties, as we all do, you better hope that they're not a series of successful terrorist attacks. And so we have to have a layered defense. Intelligence is the outer layer. Intelligence, if done properly, is enormously intrusive. That means it has to be under control, and mistakes have been made in that area. But no question about it, it has to be taken seriously, or we're going to be, we're not going to be protected like we need to be.
The most difficult challenge to any government confronting terrorism is to protect civil liberties, to stay within the rule of law, and to act in a humane fashion. To be fair, we're trying to feel our way. The courts have rejected monitoring of phone calls without warrants. The courts have rejected detention of American citizens without trial. The courts have rejected military tribunals that violate due process. But we're going back and revisiting that. The principle is protect liberties, but primarily protect national security. We are going to face incredible challenges. We're going to be looking at national ID cards. We're going to be looking at massive databases where all our information is collected. We're going to be looking at the same laws they have in England, 28-day preventive detention of individuals who are suspected of terrorist activities for the purpose of investigation. I want to emphasize that we are under siege from low-level, unaffiliated terrorist cells. It's very difficult to detect these individuals. They fall underneath the security screen. And when we talk about civil liberties, that must be balanced against the reality of the threat.
Thank you. Let's turn now to Muslim relations in Chicago.
We're going to turn to Cheryl Burton to look at the changes that have happened in that community and also the efforts to create more understanding. Cheryl?
Well, Kathy and Ron, 9/11 created a new reality for Muslim Americans. Hate crimes against Muslims increased dramatically after the terror attacks. They are still much higher than before 9/11. ABC7's Leah Hope shows us what Chicago area Muslims face every day, 5 years later.
A couple scoops of uniquely blended coffee and spices brews the specialty of the Salmi house. This is one of many traditions Hitem Salmi brought with her from Jerusalem decades ago. She and her husband fled Palestine to find peace in the U.S. Her children, now grown with their own families, make the southwest suburbs home. They lived the American dream until 9/11.
People that would say hello to you didn't say hello to you anymore. People that you would see walk past every day would now give you a dirty look.
The worst came in 2003. A neighbor firebombed the family's van. It was parked on the street as Hitem sat with her grandchildren in the front room.
I hear the bomb, the loud.
Eric Nix was convicted of a hate crime and sentenced to 15 months in federal prison. He lived in the neighborhood, but the Selmies didn't know him. It's that kind of hatred that disturbs the Selmies, that see themselves as patriotic as any American family.
This became our culture, and this became our home. And you know, that was all taken away.
Now I don't feel safe.
Hate crimes targeting Muslim Americans spiked after 9/11, largely due to misperceptions and ignorance. When protesters targeted the Bridgeview Mosque in the days after 9/11, local police protected the mosque and its members. It was here that law enforcement officials realized they needed to connect with the community in order to protect Muslim Americans and protect the country. The FBI's Chicago special agent in charge was involved in the initial roundtable discussions with federal officials and Muslim American community leaders. The current special agent, Rob Grant, carries on that discussion.
Having the ability to reach out and talk to somebody on a first-name basis and not introduce myself to them at the time of the crisis is really important.
Not all hateful activity reaches the level of criminal. Subtle forms of hate, a comment, a stare, can make every day difficult. Many Muslim women wear scarves over their heads. The head covering is called a hijab. It's part of a commitment to faith, philanthropy, and family. Some women say it allows them to focus on what's important and build inner strength.
It's put an emphasis on what I'm saying rather than, you know, does my hair look okay, or, you know, am I wearing the right color blush for the season?
This symbol of faith has also made Muslim American women targets of harassment.
I probably was subject to more staring and all that back at home rather than being on the school campus.
Hina Musalji didn't wear a hijab before 9/11. The native New Yorker lost 3 friends in the World Trade Center attacks. With a scarf loosely draped on her head, she answered the call for blood donations after the attacks.
I got to the facility and I was told that they didn't need my blood. And that was hurtful, extremely hurtful.
From that moment, Musalji changed her life. From an investment banker, she went back to school to practice human rights law, and she began wearing a hijab.
I wanted to be that PR. I wanted people to come up to me. I wanted people to ask me. I didn't want them to ask these fanatical crazies.
While there continues to be unease and insecurity, there is also hope that ongoing discussions, both formal and informal, will combat hate and allow all Americans to live the dream of peace.
You want people to understand your faith and not be sucked in by all these misconceptions.
Everybody feels like a victim. You know, the victim of terror, victim of discrimination, victim of, just aggression.
Mr. Rehab, we have been told that in other areas of the world, terror plots have been thwarted by local Muslim communities and information that comes from them. We've also been told that Muslims in America are a very well assimilated American culture. Yet I think I also hear you saying we're not winning many friends these days in those communities.
Unfortunately, I think that the situation is looking more dire now than it did immediately after 9/11. According to a Washington Post and ABC News survey published in the year 2005, 46% of all Americans surveyed say that they have an evil or they see Islam as an evil religion, which is a 7% increase from the same question to the same group of people immediately after 9/11. Now the question is, how can Muslim Americans work with local law enforcement and intelligence agencies to make this country more secure if they are targeted with suspicion by average individuals and government agencies as well?
Help me understand something. It's my understanding that the Quran prohibits suicide and the taking of innocent life. How is it possible around the world for suicide bombers to then be recruited under the umbrella of faith?
I think the crux of the matter is to understand that we're talking about 2 different domains. We're talking about the domain of terrorism and the domain of Islam. The domain of terrorism has about less than a fraction of a percent of the total Muslim population, whereas over 99.99% of the world Muslim population shuns these terrorists and their ideology and is diverse in every way possible. We're talking about 1.4 billion people worldwide, and we're talking about 8 million Americans who are Muslim. And so they're diverse as these large numbers can possibly be in every possible way, and shun this very fringe anti-civilization type philosophy that emanates out of terrorist circles, which are as underground in the Muslim world as they are in the West.
And the ACLU has seen an increase in the number of cases that you have in terms of discrimination. One of the most disturbing cases the ACLU has brought involves a number of Muslim Americans, all of whom were born here, who have been subjected to abusive interrogation when they re-enter this country, often just from a trip over the border to Canada, because their names are erroneously placed on an anti-terrorist watch list. But yet law enforcement can't get that list cleaned up and can't get the innocent names off that list. So the consequence, again, our law enforcement resources are being squandered by interrogating again and again and again. With some of our plaintiffs, it's been as often as 5 or 6 times. And that means that we are not focusing our law enforcement resources on trying to detect, detain, or interrogate those who actually do have a connection with terrorism. And so in many ways, I think that the question that the professor posed about we better hope we don't have another attack or civil liberties are really going to suffer is the wrong question, because there's no proof here that it's really our